Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, November 28th, 1987. Warren, just a few years and a little water over the dam. Good to see you.
Quite a bit of water, yes. It's very good to see you, too. Yeah.
A long time since you were breaking in a new singer, the great lyricist and journalist Gene Lees.
Right, after his Downbeat days, when he was was he the editor of Downbeat? I think he was, editor-in-chief. And then he became our road manager when I was at the Paul Winter Group right after that. That's when I really became a professional musician, just after I was here, actually. I think that was my first job away from home, away from Chicago, when I met you that time.
You had been studying at Northwestern, hadn't you?
University of Chicago, on the south side, even better, all those clubs around. And that's where I first discovered jazz, so I was pretty green at that point.
So the Chicago scene was the Academy of Life Learning.
It was great, yeah. Johnny Griffin down the street and Miles around the corner, and run up to the London House to hear Oscar, and it was really an education. I hadn't planned on that. I was studying chemistry, organic chemistry, and going for a master's degree, and I ended up playing jazz in little clubs in Minneapolis.
That's stunning. So you missed the whole world of science.
Yes. Thank goodness, yes.
Except I think today with the technology, isn't music somewhat a science?
Well, not for me. I've investigated the synthesizers. I've really gone into them and the computer and everything, and I like the way I play better. I think it's good for people that aren't, I don't know, should we say gifted players, or better for arrangers that can't really play keyboard instruments to have the computer do it. But I've done a full 180 now, and I'm really back into the grand piano, as a way of life, a way of art.
It is a grand sound, isn't it? And I asked you a little earlier in auditioning some material that what was that piano you were playing? Was it a Steinway?
That was a famous piano, that 322, old 322. It used to be down at Columbia 30th Street Studios. And Red Garland, you heard all those milestones in those albums. He played on it. Bill Evans did Affinity, and Ruth Laredo recorded Rachmaninoff's music on it. And I did one of my solo albums on it, and I just did this recent DMP album, Hands On it. So I'm familiar with that instrument. It's a concert grand, the real cookie.
And it's been played by seasoned hands.
Yes, yeah. Well, Wynton Kelly and Bill Evans and Red Garland is enough for me.
That piano was tuned exactly to the environment, that old church studio. I remember what a sound it had.
That was a magic room. You'd walk in there, and there's E. Power Biggs's organ in the corner, and Serkin's piano, and Horowitz's piano, and Glenn Gould's piano looking at you, under lock and key, of course. But I think once Bill Evans told me he got a hold of Glenn's piano and used it on an album, one that had the repeating notes on it. They went like this. And he was thrilled with that. He just to have a chance to get at it. But that was a major magical room in the history of recording. And it's no more, it's some kind of video studio now. And CBS had put this great piano in a warehouse near an open window, and when my tuner found it, it had about a foot of snow coming in on it, and he had to completely rebuild it. And now it's in a place called Clinton, a new studio that's really a great room, too.
That reminds me of old Liederkranz Hall, which was another, Liederkranz Hall, which was another center for recording that had absolutely the ultimate in acoustics as far as that day and time was concerned, which was roughly in the late 30s.
Where was that? In what city?
In New York City.
Oh, really? Now, come on. Really? Liederkranz?
I'm not putting you on. That's not a lot of cheese.
I don't know where that was. I'm not familiar. I remember Webster Hall, which was RCA used that. That was their competing room. None of those places exist anymore. And then there was Media Sound, which was another old church up on 57th, and that's disappeared now. So Clinton is about the only big room left where you bring in a whole orchestra and it sounds delicious.
Warren Bernhardt, I was thinking on the way over to the airport here, when you began your life learning experience in Chicago, what really triggered you to, just leave chemistry and science behind? Was there some figure in the jazz movement that opened things up?
Yeah, Oscar Peterson. I went to, I took my date. I'd heard about this guy from Canada. He's supposed to be a great jazz pianist. And I didn't really know what that meant, in essence, what excitement lay in store for me. So I took my best date, and, we went and we got all dressed up, and we ordered a steak, and this big black guy came up and sat at the piano, and I didn't I love to eat, and I didn't touch my dinner. I was so thrilled. I was sitting right by the keyboard. He just literally changed my life just like that. And I immediately went back and started practicing jazz on the piano. I said, it had such vibrancy, and through my childhood I'd played classical music, and I was even a concert pianist when I was 9 and 10 years old. And I dropped it. I decided not to pursue that as a way of life. There was something that the magic wasn't there for me. But as soon as I heard what could be done in improvising with the bass, with Ray Brown behind you, and I think Herb Ellis was there in that trio. I was convinced right then. I knew what I had to do. And then shortly after, I went and heard Miles Davis's band with Coltrane and Cannonball and Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb, and that finished it. I was gone, and I was hooked.
Warren, it sounds like you were on the circuit between the London House and the Bird House.
No, that was the Sutherland Lounge down on 47th and Drexel. I was at the University of Chicago. Right in that neighborhood, there were a lot of great clubs, McKee's, and a lot of small clubs. And so it was a great place. They were always looking for piano players, either there or up on Rush Street. So it was a perfect opportunity to begin working and playing. Almost immediately, I began getting $5 a night to go and play with a trio somewhere. And, I learned a lot in a short amount of time. In 2 years, I was actually playing professionally and touring South America with Paul Winter. So.
Warren, it seems that with that first experience with Oscar Peterson, beyond the vibrancy, what was it that struck you? You were already playing classical repertoire, weren't you?
Well, I had played a great deal as a child, as I mentioned, but my father had passed away when I was 13, and he was a pianist, and I was deeply upset when he died. So I gave up playing for a few years in there. And in high school, I dabbled with it. I played a Mozart concerto with the orchestra, and I played oboe in the orchestra a little bit until I had to have braces on my teeth. That ended that experience. If you've ever tried to play an oboe with braces, it doesn't work. And I'd largely left the music world. I was really into science. I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on what it was. I think it was just the sheer excitement of the music itself, and it was something I didn't know it was possible to do that, and maybe it was some kind of call, like they used to call. Duke Ellington had the call, and the response was, for me, was immediate. I can't put it into words that gracefully. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it was total, the experience, and it covered all sides. I could see that it was a great emotional thing to be able to play, but just the physical, Oscar's physical presence was so exciting, and his mental energy, the whole spiritual part, it was all multifaceted experience. It was deeply affected me.
And it seems that captures you and envelops you to this day.
Definitely. I think more than ever now. I seem to be at a really good point in my life now where finally I like the sound of my own playing. Besides Oscar, then right after I moved to New York, Gene Lee's, the first day I was in New York, as we go back to Gene Lee's again, he introduced me to Bill Evans, who became my mentor, my real close friend. And he was, I imitated him to the point of, I don't even like to admit it. But then his music was so rich that it gave me such a firm foundation now. Now I'm beginning to discover that after Bill's gone, I'm a late bloomer, I think is what it is. I'm really beginning to discover my own voice, and I like the sound of my own playing now, which was a big breakthrough. For many years I was always thinking of these other big guns and not too ecstatic about the way I sounded, but now I seem to really enjoy going and playing and listening to myself.
Developing that confidence is certainly one of the big challenges. If you have all the technique in the world, that's one thing. But what does the well-balanced confidence give you?
Well, it gives you the at least the ability to not get hesitant about anything you're doing. I mean, when you do go ahead and book something, you really do it at 100%. You know, and I like that feeling. It's not. I don't know if it's confidence so much. There's so many factors. At first, I was a shy person. I was a shy kid to begin with. I had to overcome that, and then I went through a terrible period when I began recording in the studios of a microphone fright, which is happens to some people, and I conquered that. And then I went through some things with audiences, and I've gone through therapy and all kinds of things that seem to have helped. I finally realized my father is not out in the audience, to judge me. That was a big breakthrough for me to realize that. I've seen it with a lot of performers. They expect either their teacher or their father or mother or somebody is out there in the audience, and they're not. It's just a bunch of people that like music. That's basically what it is. I think you fear hostility and you get anxious about it, and anxiety is the biggest stopper until you feel really comfortable with yourself and what you can do. And then there's the problem with the pianist that you don't bring your own instrument. You have to rely on the instrument that's available. And in jazz, sometimes that's not always the best thing. My biggest breakthrough was in going to Europe and Japan and getting these wonderful instruments. I think I realized that it wasn't such a battle to be heard anymore. Some of the little clubs, I still have a problem in America because the instruments aren't up to par, but everywhere I played on the continent now, I get really fine pianos too. That makes a difference.
That says something about the European and Asiatic community, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know. The grass is always greener, I guess is what it is. Here we have this marvelous thing that's grown here and is true American art, and it just isn't as well appreciated here by as many people as it is, say, in France or in Germany or in Japan. And I don't know the reason why. I really don't. I can't put my finger on it. But I'm not saying that there are not a lot of great music fans here in America, but I know when I was with Steps Ahead, we had trouble filling the small theater in the Twin Cities, and yet when we played in Paris, there were 5,000 people rioting in the street outside because they couldn't get in to hear us because it was sold out. And that difference is very marked, when you're on the stage playing, you can feel it.
Warren Bernhardt, that's quite a statement. Thank you. I'll be back with you in just a moment. Warren Bernhardt, the name Bill Evans, significant in the repertoire and literature of jazz piano and performance. Your observations of Bill Evans?
Well, I consider him the granddaddy of us all, in a certain kind of sense. Not that he came before others. Well, he's part of a lineage that I consider they're all granddaddies that came through James P. Johnson, Jelly Roll Morton, James P. Johnson, went into Art Tatum, and then Bud took it, and then Bill got it, and now it's up for grabs. I think Keith Jarrett is continuing it, and Herbie Hancock's doing some good stuff, and occasionally Chick Corea does some amazing things. But I think it's kind of diluted. But when those guys were in their prime and functioning, they were the granddaddy guys. From what I could see, they were the major force in piano at that time that they were alive. My fortunate experiences were that I knew Bill well, and we were good friends. And I wasn't his student because he never taught, but we did have a couple times where we came together. At one point in 1963, he stayed at my apartment for 6 months, and he wasn't playing much on the road at that time, so we spent almost every day just at the piano. He'd sit over on the couch and I'd play, and he'd just say certain key things to me, and it really helped me in my development. We'd talk in musical terms, and then I'd listen to him, when he'd take a song apart, and before it ever got to the performance stage, you could know that he tried it in all the different keys, no matter what song it was. He had a frightening ability to take any song in any key at almost any tempo and play it without a wrong note, with different amazing harmonic textures going by, and each key was a different experience. He said, "Oh, maybe this sounds all the things you are. This sounds better in B, maybe. Let me try it in B." And he would just. It was on the verge of something magical. It was not easy to sit there and listen to this because, first of all, at my stage of development, it was very forceful and it was very inspiring and everything. At the same time, it was extremely discouraging because I'd go to play the same tune in G or F, and I'd make a ton of mistakes, And so all of a sudden I realized what's involved in this business, that I was just covering the surface, and here was a guy that was really in, say, my total involvement didn't come up much above the soles of his feet, He was totally immersed in this. And then he would say, I remember one famous quote of his, he said, what everybody else has done didn't even come up to Bud Powell's ankles on the piano. He says, he named all these other pianists, and he says, that's how much he admired Bud's work, and he considered himself only a small part of what Bud was capable of doing. So that was inspiring too. I mean, here was a truly great focused artist that had all his things together, and he considered himself totally unworthy compared to some of his heroes. So it was a lesson in humility. Here was a great man, a humble man, with extreme talent. I remember hearing him just before he died. I went into the Vanguard, and he played Denny Zeitlin's "Quiet Now" with his last trio with Mark Johnson and Joe LaBarba. And it was just, you could not play the piano any better than this. I mean, everything was perfect. The molecules in the room are all going with him, And he came off the bandstand. I remember we sat on the back steps up in the Vanguard and talking. He says, "Isn't this exciting?" He says, "Did you see those molecules scintillating?" And did you hear that? He said, "I'm so thrilled." He said he was so happy. He was like a little kid, It made me so happy to see him that way because he'd paid his dues. He'd played on bad pianos and terrible circumstances with the wrong sidemen, and he'd been through it all. And here he was, just completely thrilled to be Bill Evans, and he was playing it's indescribably beautiful what he was doing at the time. He was very proud of that group, though. I think when Scott LaFaro died, he went through many, many years there. I mean, even with all the great trios with Eddie Gomez for 12 years, and where he finally found it again, what he'd been looking for with Joe and Mark. So I think shortly thereafter he passed away, but I think he died a happy man from what I can gather. So that made me feel that he'd reached his fulfillment, his search with his soul. So it made me consequently happy to have been a part of it, even in a small way.
Warren, as you look back, I know you mentioned the humility in his character. For you, as you began to learn under his implication and direction and your association, what did that association, as far as your performing technique and your programming and your whole approach to music, what did it forge for you?
Well, I think the primary thing was Bill was always stressing. I'm a very scattered type of individual. I've always had trouble centering myself, and I think he was always stressing with him. He said, "Warren, you've got to focus on your art better." He says you have to. His thing was focus. I mean, on the totality of your involvement in an art form, and that was the thing that he helped me the most with. And a lot of that has happened since he's passed away, just on reflecting what he had told me. He also comes to me in dreams now and gives me advice from time to time. So I have the feeling that in some sense he's still around for me, like very, very definitely still around. This, once again, is difficult to put into words. But I think the primary thing was to be able to believe in what you're doing and focus on it in a way that it's perfectly right for you. It's taken me many, many years to discover this, and a lot of it, I realize now, is due to his talks with me about focus.
I imagine visual artists go through the same sort of development too, and have to develop that focus and that center?
In particular, visual artists, could be involved in commercial graphic art or something, and I have a certain parallel with that because I've worked in the studios for years, and I do a lot of film work. I do a lot of major films I've done and in the studios, and I've done TV commercials and all that stuff, But just lately, I've been able to be very selective about those jobs and not let them interfere with what my real aim is, which is to really get into the piano and play the best I can on it. I don't know. I do think of myself now very often in terms of a painter or a sculptor when I'm working, or especially when I'm writing a new composition. I feel that I use certain parallels just on an abstract level to pinpoint my concentration. It's a valid comparison, but music is much more ephemeral to me. The materials you're dealing with, I think it's more of an abstract endeavor.
Is it color? Is it line, point and line, in a parallel? The harmonic layers.
Well, I remember Bill was the first one that told me that he believed it was a combination. If you picture like a triangle in a circle, an esoteric symbol of the three forces in nature at work, he thought it was a combination of melody, harmony, and rhythm being the three basic points of this equilateral triangle. And no matter which one you were focusing on, you couldn't ignore the other two. It was an integral, it was a whole. There was some, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. You can't separate them out. The three distinct aspects to playing jazz, and those three interact at all times. So I've done a lot of reflecting on that. It's nothing esoteric about it, really. It's a very practical application. In fact, I've been starting to do some teaching now, and I've done a set of audio tapes, and now I just completed my first video on teaching beginners and advanced players too in jazz piano. And I'm using that as a basic model of what our basic structure we're starting with, is focusing on the melody on one part, on your harmonic involvement, how you put it together. That's more of a coloristic kind of thing, what you're doing texturally, and that really lends itself to a palette. And then rhythmically, of course, you're absolutely free to do what you want to. That's more of it's almost an African kind of thing coming out rhythmically. But I find working with him in that respect was something that he always did. Plus, he worked off of a basic, either 3 or 4 point polyphony that went through all his things structurally. It was almost like playing one of Bach's 3-part inventions to watch Bill working on a tune. There would always be a bass note and a middle note and a top note interacting in a very coherent kind of way. So still, no matter what I do, I can't get away from the guy. He's there in my thinking, and I just love the way he made a piano sound just about better than anybody else before or since him. So for me, that's a great starting point. If I can start and make the piano ring and yet still make it distinctively mine, what's coming out, then I'm really accomplishing something, I feel, when I do that.
Warren Bernhardt, a pleasure talking with you as we catch flights to the north, south, east, and west. Good to renew. Thank you much.
It was great to see you again. Yeah, thanks for interviewing me.